Hello, welcome to Dealer Diagnostics. Today I've got Casey Seymour. He's a good friend of mine, and he's been doing podcasting for years. I've sat on some of his as a guest, and he's our first guest for our very first episode. So, welcome, Casey. I'm super proud to have you.
You have a low list then, Wayne. I mean,
Yeah,
I know you don't have very many friends, so I know that's why
I've
I'm
got
on this
you,
one
brother.
first.
I've got you, and you know what? If I can ride your shirt tails, that's all I need. That's all I need.
No, I'm glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
You better believe it. Thank you so much. Hey, so Casey, I wanted to talk. Obviously, we're WB Global helps a lot of dealerships right now just with parts and service and some rental and things like
Mhm.
that. But we have a vast knowledge in other areas of the dealership, right? I was an
Yeah.
owner at one point. I've been a general sales manager. So we've got more experience than just fixed operations. And I'm so happy to have you as our very first guest because I'd like to talk just about sales in general. And I'm telling you, even if you weren't a good friend of mine, I would try to reach out to you anyway because you're very well known in the industry and people really appreciate your insights and things like that. So I'd like to have you share some with our very small audience. And we don't even know how many people this is going to reach. This is our very first one, but we'd like to have you share with our audience what the market holds for 2025 and going into 26.
Yeah.
So
Well, Wayne, it's been great. You and I worked together for I don't know 10 years or something like that. The time frame we worked together, but it was good. I mean, you always are a great sounding board for me on stuff that I was working on and different phases of the business. I knew you primarily from being on the aftermarket side of the business because that's what you were taking care of, but I knew you had a pretty solid background coming from the automotive side in sales management and used equipment stuff and those kind of things. So it was always fun to sit and have a couple barley pops and talk about what was going on in the industry there and on that side. But I think we're in a kind of a tight spot right now. When you look at what's going on in the industry, things feel like they're getting better. If you look at where they're at, I mean, kind of coming out of COVID, we saw a huge amount of inventory hit the space. About 2.5 years worth of trade-ins showed up all in one year, which makes a huge amount of distance there to kind of cover. You can look at where things are coming up through COVID. There was hardly any inventory on any dealers' lots. Now you went from really in about a 6 month period went from hardly anything to more than you could handle. And so we saw that happen. We saw the cascade in the market down and the supply and demand that hit there. The difference between this time and the others is that there was such I kind of refer to this as a scarcity premium, really is what it was. And the premium that got put on there was anywhere between, it could be 25 to 40% worth of premium that got put on these machines because it was just like anything else, right? Everybody had tons of money coming out of COVID. And so people need to spend that money. And when they spent that money, they were able to, pretty much throw whatever dollars around they wanted to make things happen. And then once supply caught up with demand, simple, economics 101, you saw the market start to slide. And this correction was a lot rougher than most corrections, simply because you saw that premium come off plus a typical 25 to 40% reduction anyway. So in a lot of cases, you saw some stuff that would maybe have slid 65%, to really kind of overcome some of the issues that we're seeing. And one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome was not just the amount of equipment that's out there, but it's also interest rates, right? So
right.
that's not a big shocker to anybody. Interest rates were always a uh, a big kind of play in the marketplace. Uh, Previously, we always had to worry about interest. Like interest wasn't an issue, but we're paying 1.5 to 3% interest. I mean, now you're paying 6.5 to 10%, depending on where you're at. And then couple that with, the $500,000 units, and you have, we used to talk about $20 million worth of inventory. Now we're talking about $20 million worth of combine heads, right? I mean, so it's a whole different animal, and you're paying 6.5% on that. So what we've seen is we saw this big, obviously like you would normally see a big flex of auction activity coming through into 22, 23, 24. It really calmed down last half of 24, going into 25. The market stabilized. If you look at auction values year over year, where things are at, you see things are flat, right? I mean, you were seeing like year over year over year, you're seeing 25, 30, 40 $1,000 declines in values. Now you're seeing like we're up $2,500 on average on row crop tractors, right? Year over year, which Yeah, the market's at $2,500, but I consider that to be flat, right? Because you can kind of, it's an average, so there's gonna be some higher, some lower, those kind of things. But that just shows you that things are starting to stabilize. And if you look at across the board, most things are starting to stabilize. I have a metrics that I use to kind of just test the barometer of the marketplace, where when retail value is 120% or higher of auction value, that's when you see a big cascade into the auction marketplace. Those numbers are starting to shrink, and we're not seeing as much stuff go to auction. I think that's two reasons. One is the market stabilizing, right? So retail prices have come down into a more attractive space, and if you can go to auction and save 150 or $200,000, $300,000 on a piece of equipment, it's people are going to do that, right?
Right.
When
Sure.
it comes back into a range where, okay, I'm willing to pay this much extra because I feel like the dealership's worth this much, then that changes the dynamics of the auctions. We're kind of there right now. The other side of it too is, the dealership side of it, just like you saw coming in out of 16 and 17, the dealerships are kind of over the auction thing, and they're kind of done bleeding. But that being said, I feel like as you look into the fourth quarter of 2025, you're going to see some peak in auction activity again. I think it's just because, the issue we run into now is the velocity of which equipment's moving is just not fast enough to kind of overcome some of the expenses associated with interest that you see there. So I feel like there's going to be some more auction activity come to the table. As you look at commodity prices right now, you're seeing a slide in commodity prices, but that is, grain mixed grain is the scene that you hear all the time, and not everything's perfect out there, right? There's been some planting delays. There's been some replant. There's just been some. Now we're getting all this rain again on top of stuff out there, so a lot of areas are flooding. So it's kind of a feast or famine in some places during the Corn Belt. Either you're getting all the rain you can handle, and or you're not getting any, right? So
Right.
there's some spots out there that are going to be a little different. We've been fortunate out here. I don't remember the last time it rained, and now we've gotten 3 years worth of rain. It feels like here in the last 2 weeks.
Right. Right. We get about 15 inches annually, and I think we've received that
Yeah.
in the last week.
Yeah, and it's just been, and I don't know that it rained in the last 2 years. So I think
Right.
we're we were due, and I think we're where we're at now. So I feel like going in through 2025, things are going to level out, things are going to even out. We're going to see some things move along and start to kind of head back in a good direction, similar to what we saw in 2017, going in 2018. I think 2026 is a year that we turn the page, and it's the quote unquote new normal, whatever that looks like, a more
Right.
stable marketplace, and things keep progressing on, into a more profitable 26. I'm not saying by any means is it, if you lost 20 grand last year and you only lose 10, that's a more profitable year. So, it's, that might be what we're looking at. Right. That's right. It's a perspective thing. So, I think as we keep ticking on down the road here, we're going to continue to see the market get more healthy and things move along, barring any kind of, black swans coming into the marketplace, things like that. But I'm pretty confident. I feel confident about, 2025 fourth quarter kind of turning the page. Things start looking more better than what they've been in the past, and then moving into 26. I feel like it's just going to be continue to get better through 26 into 27.
Well, that'll be awesome. That's good news to hear.
Yep.
So, Casey, we help a lot of dealerships, and sometimes when I'm pulling on their lot and I see a bunch of used inventory laying around, what what do you look for to say that the dealer's inventory, specifically their used inventory strategy, is broken? What would be some warning signs to you that you would say, "Hey, Mister or Mrs. Dealer, you ought to look at this because I see these as warning signs that your inventory, your used inventory, particularly, your strategy's busted.
Yeah.
You need some help."
Yeah, I think for me, I think it starts with one thing, and that you have to understand what your inventory buckets look like. And
Okay.
I think that's I bracket my inventory into four, maybe five buckets. I look at the 1 to 2 year old stuff. I look at the 3 to 5 year old stuff. I look at the 6 to 10 year old stuff, and then I look 10 years old and older. Right.
Okay.
Some of that stuff you might break down one more, depending on what your, every line of equipment is a little bit different. What your depth looks like and those kind of things. But I try to bracket those things out. And when I'm in there looking at those things, I want to look at what are my average dollars in each one of those buckets. What's my average days in inventory, and then what is the what are my perceived number of customers that I have for each one of those units, right?
Yeah.
Which then drives you into a washout cycle mode, which to me that's the washout. That's kind of your washout cycle, what it looks like when you are. I'm trying to figure out how fast am I selling those pieces of equipment in there, and where do I have holes in those buckets, right? So if I have a bunch of 1 to 2 year old stuff, but I don't have any 3 to 5 year old stuff, but then I got a bunch of 6 to 10 year old stuff, there's a hole right there that you got to figure out. And the stagnant nature of your inventory is probably caused because there's nothing in that 3 to 5 year old bucket to keep things moving, right? You know what I mean? So what are you trying to do to target that? And I think some people automatically run to, hey, we've got a whole bunch of 1 to 2 year old stuff. Let's build a program for that and see if we can't, get that stuff off our books, which you should be doing anyway, right? Because that's
Yeah.
where your biggest, most amount of risk is, your interest costs, those kind of things, why not there? But you have to measure that across the entire spectrum of your inventory. And if you don't do that, you may be actually making your situation worse. So truly understanding what you've got and truly understanding how things move throughout those from east all the way down that line, it really makes a big difference on how what you need to manage your inventory and where you need to and how you need to manage it. Right? Is it a crisis mode, or is a, hey, you know what, we're actually short some. We need to figure out how we're going to get more, and where's that going to come from?
Right. Very good advice. No, I like that a lot. And now this next question, I think I know the answer from working with you, but what do you what role do you think data plays in forecasting used equipment pricing? And do you feel like most dealers are using it effectively?
I mean, data's everything, right? I mean,
And
and
I knew you'd say
yeah,
it because I know you're a data kind of
yeah.
guy.
Yeah, I'm not the best guy at of making it all work like I should, but I truly understand that data's there. I would encourage every dealership to take a hard look at what you have. You have so much. All the people pay for all this data inside in the
Right,
marketplace, right?
right, right.
They pay for all this data. There's so much data inside of your business system that is free that will solve most of your problems. You just have to understand um, how are you going to, disseminate that data from one point to the next point, so you make sure that you've got everything in line. I think when I look at data, the way I want it to function and work is I want to make sure I'm looking for patterns as much as I can, right?
Okay,
How, like, when's Wayne Brozick coming and buying something, right? Is he
right.
buying something new, buying something used? Is it every 3 years, every 5 years, every 2 years, every year? Like, what's he doing? What kind of pattern can I see about Wayne Brozick? And then once I've established what that pattern looks like, where should Wayne be in that pattern now, right? So I'm trying to match, and also want to take those customers and grind them into um, buckets as well, just kind of like the inventory bucket, right? You got a new bucket, you got an A bucket, a B, C, D bucket, so on and so forth down the line, however you want to cut those people up. But I take a look at an A buyer. A new buyer is a new buyer. There's no A buyer is not a new buyer. The new buyer is a new buyer. They buy new.
Right.
An A buyer to me is that late model, low hour, 1 to 2 year old, trying to find the most bang for their buck when it comes to technology and try to stay as close to the cutting edge as they can afford to. They're buying that 1 to 2 year old piece of equipment. A B buyer is they're buying that 3 to 5 year old stuff. Typically their trade cycle is going to be 3 to 5 years, depending on what it is. It could be longer than that, it could be shorter than that, but they're looking for something in there. And then the A buyer, they're buying something every 2 to 3 years. It feels like on a cycle. If you look at what they're doing, the 6 to 10 year old buyer is they're really looking for that high depreciation, higher houred stuff. Like they're going to buy the 5 to 7 thousand hour tractor, and they're going to buy the 750 to 1,200 hour combine. Like they're buying those older combines that are fitting in older tractors and those kind of things. Then you got a D buyer in my book. The D buyer to me is the person you really don't know when they're going to come to the marketplace. They're looking for perceived value. They might buy a 2 year old tractor that's got 11,000 hours on it. That's just that freak tractor that comes from a produce farm in Arizona or something like that. And they might buy that, but they also might buy an 18,000 hour 4-wheel drive tractor to because they kind of do their own work type of thing. So I think those things are there. The important thing about those customers is where are those customers at on your profitability spectrum, and I think
Okay.
that tracked that a lot. So to me, an A buyer, a used buyer, they're really important people to buy from. You really want those people. You want to establish that group of people and really go after that group of people as much as you can, because again, you know what your market looks like, so then you can start making. If you have if you have 10 combines and you only have 3 buyers, you got a problem, right?
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
right.
yeah. But if you have 10 combines and you've got 15 buyers, well, where are those 15 buyers at? Who's probably going to buy something right now, and how can I speed somebody up into that next step? When I was in used equipment, the most profitable customers that I dealt with were that B and C buyer, that buying group there in the middle. And the reason for that was we typically made a decent margin on the used piece that we're selling, but there was so much back in parts and service business on those pieces of equipment when they came in. I was never a big, hey, let's recondition this stuff
I
back
remember
to
those days.
new. But one thing I really appreciated was the technician going through and telling me what's wrong,
Amen.
what's
That's right.
has to be fixed now, what can go to the end of the season, those kind of things.
Correct.
I built a budget around that and said, hey, Mr. Customer, we've got $10,000 worth of recon. How do you want to spend that? And what I
Correct.
found, it kind of felt like the gift card effect, right? You've got this thing costs $200 and you got $100 gift card. Well, in your mind, you're only spending 100 of your own dollars, so whatever, right? Well, same concept I think was a lot of that on the reconditioning side. There's $15,000 maybe quote made it close to new again. Well, their idea is, hey, I'm only going to spend 5,000 of my own money. I can wrap that into my financing, and I've got $15,000 done for $10,000. And I
Yeah.
think I think a lot of that kind of played into that spectrum. So to me, it was I really enjoyed those machines because of what they did for the dealership as a whole, right? Not so much now the 1 and 2 year old stuff. Obviously, you went through the shop and did those kind of things too, but typically there wasn't that much to do on them.
Correct.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You did the oil change, you did the things, filters and fluids and those kind of things, but which anymore that adds up to a big number. But I mean, it's watching those other components come into play as you went down that curve, that made a big difference too. So when I'm looking at where does data fit into all that stuff, to me, it's understanding what your customers are doing when they're coming to play, and then when those machines come in, what 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 would you typically see as a failure on a machine like that, and how can you help make sure that your reconditioning costs, because you can over and under reconditioning stuff, right? If I overestimate the reconditioning cost, well, that's $5,000 that my competition is going to maybe use against me because of what they know that I don't know, right?
Right.
On the
Correct.
flip side of that is if I put $5,000 more in it and I know there's an engine problem, but the competition doesn't, and they end up getting the deal, well, now they've inherited an engine problem. That's a $5,000 problem, right?
Right.
So now you've got this issue that you have to overcome, and you know how that works, man. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just one thing. Whenever the wheels on the bus, the first wheel on the bus falls off, eventually all four of them
It's all
fall.
gonna come. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it never gets better, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so trying to avoid those things that were coming through like that made sense. Another thing too, just what's historically what has been what's your profitability with each customer you're working with, and the ones that you're most profitable with, reward them for being the most profitable person out there by giving them the best possible deal you can give them, and not some customers are easy to work with, and some customers you have to, they want to pull you through the fence with by your nose and try to squeeze you through, and those are the ones that typically are looking for that cheaper piece of equipment for a reason, right? Because it's what
Yes.
they want.
Yes.
But what they want, they want the cheaper piece of equipment but the more expensive one for the cheaper price, right?
That's right. That's right.
And so you kind of understand who those are. So as I looked at all those things and the data and those things that came through, I made sure who those customers were, that we were on top of that. The other side of that too was I always wanted to understand, what's our typically when we take a 1 or 2 year old piece of equipment in, or a 3 to 5 year old piece of equipment, or whatever that number is, when it sold new, what was from the whatever the new price was back when it sold, what percentage should I be expecting to sell it as used with this many years of this model year and this many hours, right? That way, when it came in, it was a good indicator to show where the market was sliding to, right? If it was staying pretty solid year over year over year, it was, 75% of what it was new for a 2-year-old piece of equipment or something like that. That was great. But when I started seeing that dip down to 73, is that just a thing, or is it going to go back up to 75, or is it going to go down to 70, right? And kind of watching those things move as they course their way through. Even with all the price increases and all those kind of things you saw, it really never changed that number that much, right? Everyone, you would see it change in a downturn,
Sure,
you
sure.
start to slide. But when things even back out, that number pretty much came back to where it was to start with, right?
Yeah.
So watching that stuff, and that was how I indicated what was going on. Other thing too, from a data perspective, I paid attention to how many machines were on the market, and was that where we started to see a buildup, where we started to see a decline in the number of machines on the market, and all of those things told me which way the market was going to head. Right. If I saw 3 months in a row where inventory was piling up at a rapid pace, we were probably going to start seeing a slowdown. Right.
Right, right.
If
And
you
it changed
started,
your pricing strategy.
it did. You had to go back in and start thinking about, all right, cool. Well, we've been doing X. We really need to take a hard look at Y and make sure that we don't mess that up.
You better believe it.
Yep.
It's funny, Casey, when you were talking about the customers that they want the best quality machine, the lowest hour, but they want it at the rock bottom price.
Right.
I got an inside chuckle because I was thinking specifically of when I was running the car dealers, and my F&I manager, he was told by a salesperson, the sales guy came in for like his fourth time to talk to the F&I guy, and he said, this customer out here is just beating me up. And my F&I manager gets up and goes out there and says, hey, I looked at, I hear you're looking for a good buy. And the customer says, yeah, I am, and kind of a cocky, and my F&I guy goes, good buy. Because
Yep.
some customers you just
Sometimes you
can't,
just can't work with. Yeah.
you
There's
just
some
can't.
customers. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Casey, that's some perfect advice you've given. But what about the smaller dealerships, right? There's a lot of large enterprise dealerships in today's market. What kind of advice do you have for those small dealers that are competing in this tight used equipment market right now? I mean, I'm worried that some of the dealers I talk to, they're really struggling right now, and if they haven't over the course of several years been building up their parts and service departments and making those departments very profitable and robust, they're you look at their balance sheets and they're having some issues right now, and I just worry about what's the future going to hold for them. So what kind of advice would you have for them competing against others in this used equipment?
Yeah, so I think it's you understand your niche, right? I think every
Okay.
dealership has a niche, but I mean, the bigger that you become as a dealership, I think not that you lose your niche because you always have a niche, but I mean, it's that niche. You might gain another niche and another niche, another niche, and next thing you know, you're kind of all things to all people type of thing, and you kind of approach that. I think when you're a small dealership, there's a lot of really some of the best Forge Harvester dealerships, for example, that I know are 1 and 2 store dealerships, right? They have a strong service department, they have a strong parts department, they have salespeople that truly understand the Forge business and what that looks like, and they know how to move the used equipment, right?
Sure.
And that you see that a lot. You see some, you see some that are, niched into maybe more of a hay marketplace, right? And what does that look like? So I think whatever your niche is, truly understand that niche and try to make that niche be as profitable as you can and exploit it, right?
Yeah.
And really stay in front of that and really let people know, like, hey, if you're Livingston Machinery is one of those ones that always stands out to me because they're way back when I first started this 20 years ago, their logo was Big Baler USA, right? And that's what they hung their hat on. Big square balers, right?
Right,
And if
right.
you wanted to buy a big square baler in Kansas or Oklahoma, you went to Livingston Machinery, and that was just how
Sure.
it was, right? Parallel ag now, but they
Yes.
were back in the day, when they had whatever it was, 5 stores or 4 stores or whatever it was they had. That was one of those. That was a niche thing. Everybody knew that, right?
And they hung their hat on,
Yeah.
I taught the several of their dealerships, and in Oklahoma, I remember going to one of their training centers and working with their dealers, and they really pounded the 24/7 service. I
Yeah.
mean, they
Yeah.
really supported their service departments and their customers, and there you go. There's a strong niche
Yep.
market for them, and they've
Yep.
exploited it and done a great job as far as I know, and
Hmm.
obviously they
Yeah.
must have.
I mean,
They're-
they have one of the largest stretches of area that they cover on the big Baylor side of it. So, so when you look at something like that, to me, that's just one of those things where, you can't be all things to all people
Correct.
when you're trying to run, especially if you have one or two store dealership and you're the guy that owns that or the gal that owns that, you're the marketing department, you're the HR
Yes, sir.
department, you're the you're probably the parts and service manager to some extent. You got all these different irons in the fire,
Right.
and trying to find out what that niche for you is, and figure out and be awesome at it. Be
Right.
the best at that niche, and then
And
help the other stuff support that.
yeah, and I think that's really, really important because in a down market, I think some of us we're guilty of trying to become something for everybody, right? We
Right.
want to service everybody's needs.
Trying to capture every dollar you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just out of that sheer tension of trying to capture every dollar, maybe we do lose a little bit of our focus on being a niche in our market and strong in
Hmm.
certain areas. So, great advice.
Yep.
Hey, you know what? You've worked with a lot of sales managers, Casey.
Mhm.
What makes a great one stand out in today's environment, in your mind?
Well, I think it comes down to leadership, right? At any level. And I think when you're looking at the sales manager that's there, it's it's listening to what's going on in the marketplace, right? And I'm a sales guy, and we're all. I always look at things from a sales guy's perspective because I was the worst at doing paperwork. I was the worst at turning things in on time, and I was a horrible sales guy from a paperwork perspective, right?
Yeah,
I put everything off the last possible minute, and then I
I think
rushed
that's
through it.
typical.
It's
Some
very
of my
typical.
best salespeople were exactly that way.
Yeah,
You know?
and but it's I think from and the reason some of the stuff that took forever to do was because I didn't think it was important, right?
Right.
And I was always kind of dragging my feet, like, why would you need to do this? This is so
Yeah.
stupid, right?
Right.
And then, but there was always, no one just asks you to do stuff for the sake of doing stuff, right? There's not just, well, this keeps Casey busy, so we're just going to keep checking these boxes off, and whatever else. But I think as you push your way through that, one thing that salespeople, and I was one of them, you talk to two people and they tell you the same thing. Well, that must be everybody must be the same, right?
Right.
Right. That's the new normal now. I've talked to two people, and by God, that's the other 1,500 are going to tell me the exact same thing, right?
Right.
So I think there's comes a point in time when some of that may be true, right? And from a sales perspective, sales management perspective, you need to be able to influence your salespeople as much as you let them influence you. And I think that's one of those things you have to pay attention to, right? And really
Yes.
understand where things are coming from because it's not easy right now, right? There's nothing easy about this right now, and oversimplifying and making things sound easier than they are is not it's not the best way to build morale.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
not
think,
reality.
yeah, you
It's
just
not.
gotta stand behind them. And I think the other side of it too is as a sales manager, what tools are you using in your toolbox to help your sales guys be successful, right? What kind of programs are you building? What kind of what kind of are you is there some kind of a contest you can do to kind of keep the competitive nature about sales guys together, those kind of things. But to me, I think it's just really being like listening to what's going on, truly understanding what your marketplace is, right? You got to go out with your sales guys, you got to see what they're doing, you got to ride along with them, you got to hear it from the horse's mouth of what's going on out there, and then come back in and let's build a program. Let's take a look at Wayne's farm. And we just talked to Wayne. He's heard what he's talking about, where his pain points were. What can we do to help that? And one of the biggest things you see right now to overcome is I've got my current interest rate is 2.5%, and you want me to trade this in for 7.5% or whatever current interest rates are. 6.5%. That's a huge number. And oh, by the way, it's $300,000 more. So
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
now you've got to overcome that. So all of those things kind of come into play where you kind of, I don't want to say everything is a one-off situation, but everything's a one-off situation in this kind of situations, where you got to really take a hard look at what's going on in the marketplace and truly understand that, and then, you know, be influenceable when you're talking to your people.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So Casey, we're about ready to wrap this up, and again, I really do appreciate your time, and I'm so glad that you were our very first guest. And when we become famous, I'll make sure that you get endorsement fees
I
off
appreciate that. Yeah.
this episode. But what the last question I have for you is, what habit or what mind shift change do you think all the dealer leadership people should adopt in 2025? I mean, I know we only have a half the year left, but what's one thing if you were leading the team again at a retail environment? What would be one thing that you'd really want them to focus in on, or as if you had leadership? Obviously, you'd have sales managers, location managers under you.
Sure.
What's one thing you would ask them to do differently in 2025?
I think truly understanding what the forward looking part of your business looks like, right? I think one of the biggest things here, people got caught with not truly understanding what they had put in order in now and what that was going to do to inventory 6 months down the road, 9 months down the road, a year down the road, right? So we saw a lot of that happening. I think everyone does a budget process. I have yet to find anyone that just kind of wings it every year and hopes that it all works out. I
There's a
think
few out there. I've seen them. I've seen them.
for the most part, people are, hey, we expect to do this amount in sales and this amount in parts and this amount in service and this amount of technology, so on and so forth. And what's the plan look like to get there? And one thing I like doing with my guys, and I think it helped them quite a bit, was that was easy to sit down with them and say, hey, you want to go out and sell X number of dollars. When someone tells you, hey, you got to sell, $10.5 million worth of stuff this year. That's a big number, right? People are like, well, God dang, how am I going to do that?
Yeah.
I got to sell almost $1 million a month. And so I always broke it down with them into opportunity. What's an opportunity look like? So I broke them into $150,000 opportunities. And it's easier to talk about, okay, so you got to go out and sell, whatever, $150,000 options, right? That'll get you that 10.5 million bucks, right? As you work your way through that, and they're like, okay, well, that makes sense. So I can sell. But if you go out and sell $400,000 something, that's, it's $250,000 options, or opportunities. So working through that. And I think showing what that looks like, and having a kind of a well planned out philosophy of, hey, every sales guy will tell you, like, I used to start a conversation with, like, how much money do you want to make this year? And they would tell them, we used to just work the commission program backwards, and I would say, okay, cool, this is what you're at. Your close rate is whatever, and this is what kind of pipeline you need to have to generate this kind of cost. And I think that made a bigger impact on, one, morale, and
Sure.
two, on us hitting our budget numbers than anything else did, because it was very defined. Hey, you need to close, you need to have 45 opportunities, and you need to close 10 of them, right, every month, and that'll get you to your nut. And that was the thing that they were looking for. So I think if you can be diligent and looking forward ahead, like this month, we're going to see this much of used inventory hit our books that we didn't have the previous month. What does that do for us? And then, Mr. CFO, what can we afford? How much more interest can we afford to pay every month? And if they say zero, then you've got 6 months to figure out what you're gonna do to make that go away. And I think that's so doing that, and then obviously working with your sales guys on being very pointed at, hey, we got this goal to hit. How do we hit that goal? There's not a whole lot of 90-yard football, or not a lot of 90-yard touchdowns scored in football. There are a bunch of 10, 15-yard or 10 or 15 play drives that go 90 yards, right? And that's what we're trying to do, right? You got to block and tackle, and you got to make to set the defense up so you can get the next first down, and that's what you're trying to look for every time.
Amen. Well, brother, thank you so much again for being on our episode. I really do appreciate it. You're a rolling ball of knowledge. I really do appreciate everything you've offered up today, and I hope that you'll come back again. I want to invite you probably every month, but I won't.
Well, if the check clears, I'll be back. I'll be back again.
Yeah,
But,
exactly. Casey,
right.
thank you so very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Wayne. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Take care.